They were never just sacrificed. They became something worse. And if this theory is true, then every smiling monster walking through the streets of the town was once a child who screamed, a child who suffered, a child who was offered to something ancient. Because when you go back and look at from, the clues were never hiding. They were right in front of us. The children Tabitha keeps seeing. The strange lullaby. The symbol carved everywhere. The tunnels beneath the town. The smiling creatures that hunt at night. At first, all of it felt disconnected. But here's what changes everything. What if it's all one story? What if the children weren't simply murdered in some forgotten ritual? What if their pain transformed them? And what if the monsters are what survived? Because think about it. The show keeps repeating one thing over and over. Children matter. Not adults. Not the town itself. The children. Every major supernatural vision somehow leads back to them. Tabitha sees them. Victor remembers them. Even the cave drawings point toward them. That wasn't random. The show has been telling us this from the beginning. And once you connect the pieces, the entire mythology changes. Because sacrifice in ancient horror stories is never about death. It's about exchange. Something is given so something else can be born. And in From, that something may be the creatures. Look at how the monsters behave. They don't act like wild animals. They act like broken people. They smile. They speak softly. They move slowly. Almost like they're replaying a role they were trapped in. That smile has always felt wrong. Not evil. Forced. Like a mask. Like something pretending to remember what being human looked like. And this is where it gets terrifying. Children often smile when they're scared. Especially when forced to. Especially in rituals. Especially when trying to please adults. What if the monsters smile because that was the last expression burned into them? Not joy. Submission. Fear. Obedience. That changes everything. Because suddenly, their smiles stop being monstrous. They become tragic. And then there's the way they talk. They whisper names. They know secrets. They know personal details they should never know. How? Most people assume the town itself tells them. But what if it's memory? Fragments. Pieces left behind. Imagine a child being sacrificed while surrounded by the townspeople. Hearing names. Hearing voices. Hearing prayers. Those memories would remain. Twisted. Broken. Incomplete. But still there. That's why the monsters feel familiar. Not because they're demons. Because they were human once. And maybe they remember. Not fully. But enough. Enough to whisper. Enough to manipulate. Enough to hurt. And look at where they sleep. Underground. In the tunnels. That matters more than people realize. Because the tunnels aren't just hiding places. They feel ancient. Ritualistic. Like burial chambers. Like wombs. Places where something was created and never truly finished. When Tabitha enters those tunnels, what does she find? Drawings. Symbols. Evidence. History. It feels less like a monster nest and more like a grave. A grave for children. But not normal graves. Transformation chambers. Places where death became rebirth. The cave drawings support this. People standing in circles. Strange symbols overhead. Figures reaching upward. At first, it looked like worship. But what if it was sacrifice? What if the symbol itself represents the ritual? A process. A machine. A cycle. And every time it repeats, something new is born. Something worse. That symbol appears too often to mean nothing. On walls. In visions. In memories. Like a mark burned into reality itself. Almost like ownership. And who would own those children? Whatever lives beyond the town. Whatever controls the forest. Whatever feeds on suffering. Because that's the real pattern nobody talks about. Pain creates power here. Fear strengthens something. Loss feeds something. Death changes the rules. Every tragedy feels purposeful. Like energy being harvested. And if that's true, then the original children weren't random victims. They were the first fuel source. The first offering. The beginning of everything. Which means the monsters aren't the cause of the curse. They're the result of it. Victims turned into weapons. That redefines every attack in the series. Every kill, every smile at the window, every whisper in the dark. It isn't hunger. It's repetition. A cycle. A ritual still echoing. Like they're trapped reliving their own suffering by inflicting it on others. And suddenly, the most horrifying part of From isn't that the monsters want to kill everyone. It's that they may not even understand why they're doing it. They could be acting out the pain they were born from, like trauma turned physical, like grief turned flesh. And if that's true, then nobody in this town is fighting monsters. They're fighting children who were never allowed to die. And the deeper this goes, the worse it gets. Because if the sacrificed children became the creatures, then what exactly created the children's visions? Who is still calling to Tabitha? Who still wants to be found? Because maybe not all of them transformed. Maybe some part of them remained behind. Watching, waiting, begging for release. And that means the monsters outside the houses might only be half the story. But here's what changes everything. If the monsters really were the sacrificed children, then the visions aren't warnings. They're memories. And suddenly, Tabitha's journey becomes far more disturbing. Because every time she sees those children, they never attack her. They never try to hurt her. They just look at her. Like they want something. Like they're trying to remind her. That wasn't random. The show has been telling us this from the beginning. The children appear pale, broken, terrified. Not evil. Not corrupted. Just trapped. And that's important. Because if the monsters are the physical result of the ritual, then the visions could be the spiritual remains. Two halves. Body and soul. The body twisted into monsters. The soul left behind in the place of sacrifice. That would explain why the children keep leading Tabitha deeper into the mystery. Not because they want her dead. Because they want her to understand. And this is where it gets terrifying. The lullaby. One of the strangest recurring pieces in From. At first, it sounds comforting. Soft. Gentle. Almost protective. But lullabies were never just songs. Historically, they were used to calm children before sleep. Before fear. Before separation. And in darker folklore, before death. Think about that. What if the lullaby in From wasn't made to comfort? What if it was part of the ritual? A song sung to the children before they were sacrificed. A way to keep them calm. A way to stop them from fighting. And if that's true, then every time that song returns, it isn't random background noise. It's an echo. A memory trapped in the town itself. Like the walls remember. Like the forest remembers. Like the ritual never ended. That would also explain why music feels so unnatural here. Songs in From often trigger emotion before explanation. Because memory comes first. Truth comes later. And then there's Victor. Maybe the most important piece in all of this. Victor has always felt like the living bridge between the past and present. He remembers things no one else does. He draws what he cannot explain. He hides pieces of history. But why? Because Victor may have seen the ritual aftermath. Or worse, he may have survived the final cycle of it. Look at his drawings. Children. Trees. Blood. Shapes. Patterns. None of it feels random. They look like trauma maps. Pieces of a memory too painful to say aloud. Victor doesn't just remember monsters. He remembers where they came from. And that's why he's terrified of the tunnels. Not because monsters live there. Because that's where it started. And the show has been telling us this from the beginning. Victor never treats the monsters like simple killers. He treats them like part of something older. Something sacred. Something cursed. And this is where the night hunting makes sense. Why only at night? Why not during the day? Most people say it's just classic horror logic. But what if it's ritual logic? Night is symbolic. Darkness. Death. Transformation. Ancient sacrifices often happened after sunset, when the world between life and death was weakest. What if the monsters can only hunt at night because that's when they were created? Their existence tied to darkness itself. Bound to the exact conditions of their birth. That would mean sunrise weakens them. Not physically. Symbolically. The ritual loses power in light. That's why they return underground. Back to the place of origin. Back to the grave. Back to the womb. And suddenly the tunnels become more than shelter. They become an anchor. A place keeping the monsters alive. destroy the tunnels, and maybe you destroy the cycle. But here's what makes this even darker. The monsters don't just kill. They play. They manipulate. They talk through windows. They pretend. They tempt.
Why?
Because children learn through imitation, through mimicry, through observation. What if the creatures imitate human behavior because that's all they remember? Fragments of parents, fragments of adults, fragments of the people who betrayed them. That smiling woman at the window, that polite voice, that fake kindness. It may all be imitation, a broken child's understanding of adulthood. And that makes every interaction more disturbing. Because beneath the monster, there may still be a child trying to make sense of pain. Twisted, corrupted, violent, but still there. And this is where it gets terrifying. If the creatures are acting out trauma, then killing them may not be stopping evil. It may be silencing victims. Victims who were turned into weapons. Victims who never got justice. Victims who never got peace. That changes Boyd's entire war against them. Every trap. Every attack. Every victory. Because what if he's fighting the wrong enemy? What if the real enemy isn't the monsters, but the force that created them? The thing behind the ritual. The thing still controlling the cycle. The thing that keeps bringing people into town. Because sacrifices need replacements. And if the cycle is incomplete, it would keep pulling new people in. New pain. New fear. New blood.
Not to feed monsters.
To create more. And if that's true, then the town itself isn't a prison. It's a machine. A machine built for transformation. A machine powered by suffering. And someone or something is still running it. And this is where it gets terrifying. If the town is a machine, then the monsters were never the final product. They were only the first generation. The prototype. The original result of the children's sacrifice. Which means the ritual may still be evolving. And suddenly, everything changes. Because look at the pattern in From. Every new arrival doesn't just survive. They suffer. They lose people. They break mentally. They're pushed into impossible choices. That wasn't random. Pain here is engineered. Like the town is testing people. Measuring them. Preparing them. And the show has been telling us this from the beginning. Survival isn't enough. The town wants transformation. Think about Sarah. The voices reached her first.
Why?
Because she was vulnerable. Because she could be shaped. Because trauma makes people easier to control. That's the same logic as sacrifice. Break the mind. Shape the outcome. And if the original children became monsters through ritual, what if modern victims are being prepared for something even worse? That's the bigger implication. The cycle didn't end. It adapted. No more altars. No more obvious ceremonies. Now the town itself performs the ritual. Slowly. Psychologically. Every death. Every nightmare. Every impossible event. A piece of it. A new kind of sacrifice. But here's what changes everything. Tabitha may be the key because she's the first person to truly see the children. Not the monsters. The children. That distinction matters. Others fear the creatures. Tabitha connects to what came before, to the victims beneath the horror. And that suggests something massive. She may not be chosen to destroy the town. She may be chosen to free it. Because if the monsters are trapped children, then they don't need to be killed. They need to be released.
Think about that.
All this time, everyone believed escape meant defeating the creatures. But what if escape means ending their suffering, breaking the ritual, undoing the original sacrifice? Returning what was stolen. And suddenly the symbol makes sense. Not as a mark of evil, but as a seal. A lock. Something keeping the children bound. That symbol has appeared everywhere because it isn't just decoration. It's containment. A prison mark. And if Tabitha breaks it, what happens? Do the monsters die? Or do they remember? That's the terrifying question. Because memory changes everything. Imagine one of those smiling creatures suddenly remembering who they were, remembering their parents, remembering the ritual, remembering the betrayal. That rage would be unimaginable. Not animal rage. Human rage. A child's rage.
Pure.
Ancient. Unfinished. And this is where Boyd's blood becomes important. Boyd changed the rules. His blood killed one of them. That was supposed to be impossible.
Why?
Maybe because the monsters aren't immortal. Maybe because their forms can be destroyed. But destroying the form doesn't mean freeing the soul. It may only reset the pain. Send it back into the cycle. Back into the machine. And if that's true, every monster death may actually strengthen the system. Feed it. Like burning evidence instead of solving the crime. That would explain why the town keeps escalating. Why every answer creates bigger questions. Because the system protects itself. It adapts. And now, the most horrifying possibility. What if there are still children waiting to be sacrificed? Not in the past.
Now. Ethan.
The boy who understands too much. Who sees patterns. Who speaks in symbols. Who keeps surviving. Children are always central. That wasn't random. The show has been telling us this from the beginning. Ethan may not just be important. He may be next. And if the town needs another sacrifice to continue, then everything is leading toward him. That's why the voices care. That's why the visions keep growing stronger. That's why Tabitha was shown the children. A warning. A map. A chance to stop it before it repeats. But here's the darkest truth of all. What if the monsters aren't trying to kill Ethan? What if they're trying to protect him from becoming one of them? That changes every chase. Every encounter. Every near miss. Because if they remember even fragments of what happened, they would recognize another child heading toward the same fate. And maybe, just maybe, their violence isn't cruelty. It's desperation. Broken souls trapped in endless pain, trying to stop history from repeating. Which means the final battle of From may not be humans versus monsters. It may be humans versus the force that made them. And if that day comes, the town will have to face one impossible question. What if the only way to save everyone is to save the monsters first? Because if killing them is killing what remains of those children, then every victory so far may have been another tragedy. And maybe the real horror of From was never the creatures outside the house. It was the children crying beneath it, still waiting, still trapped, still smiling.